I secretly read my partner's journal. Now I know he's planning to leave me and rob me. I'll start by admitting I never thought I'd be the kind of person who snoops. For most of my life, I believed privacy was sacred. I still do, in principle. But sometimes, you get this gnawing feeling that something is very, very wrong, and it overpowers every moral line you once drew for yourself. I'd been with Liam for almost 3 years. We met at a climbing gym, of all places. He was this charming, talkative guy who offered to belay for me when my friend bailed. One coffee date turned into a weekend away, and before I knew it, we were living together in my condo. It's technically mine. I bought it a year before we met with a down payment from my grandfather's inheritance. But to Liam, it felt like ours. That's what he always called it. Our place. Our home. I thought it was sweet back then. For the first 2 years, it was mostly good. We had occasional spats. He never quite outgrew the habit of flirting with other women when he drank, and I sometimes resented how he didn't seem to have any career ambitions. He jumped from freelance design gigs to short-term contracts, never staying in one place for long. But he was affectionate and attentive. He always seemed grateful to be with me. Over the past 6 months, though, something shifted. He started staying out late without explanation. If I asked, he'd mutter something vague about a networking event or helping a friend with a project. He'd come home smelling like cologne I didn't recognize, too floral, too cloying. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, but then came the afternoon that changed everything. I'd taken the day off work to prep documents for my accountant. I'm a mid-level finance manager at a mid-sized firm, and tax season always leaves me frazzled. I needed my passport and some old income statements, which I kept in a fireproof lockbox under our bed. Liam was out, supposedly meeting a potential client. As I was rifling through the box, I noticed the corner of a blue leather notebook wedged behind it. It looked expensive, real leather, a little worn on the edges. I wouldn't have thought much of it if I hadn't seen my own name in the corner of one of the pages, written in Liam's unmistakable blocky handwriting. I wish I could say I closed the box and left it alone. But the second I saw my name, it felt like permission. Like if he was writing about me, I deserved to know what it said. I pulled it out and flipped to the page. The first line made my mouth go dry. I don't think I can keep this up much longer. Once the funds hit, I'm gone. I read it over and over, hoping I was misunderstanding. But the next paragraph made it even clearer. She's too trusting. I almost feel bad. But she'll be fine. She has money and a cushy job. I'll take my share and disappear. My share. He didn't have a share. This was my condo, my money, my life. He'd contributed almost nothing to the mortgage. The only reason he could live the way he did was because I'd let him. I kept reading. The entries went back months. They detailed every step of his plan, getting added as a joint account holder on my rainy day fund. He'd been pestering me about it since January, convincing me to liquidate some of my investments to plan for the future, leaving once the funds were in an account he controlled, using my own credit to take out a personal loan he'd already pre-qualified for under both our names. It was like reading a how-to guide on how to rob your partner. I don't remember sitting down on the edge of the bed, but suddenly I was there, clutching the journal like a lifeline. My first instinct was to call him and scream. My second was to cry. But neither would help. He'd deny it, or turn it around on me for violating his privacy. And even if he admitted it, what then? He'd find a way to spin it so I was the villain. So I did nothing that afternoon. I put the journal back exactly where I found it. I closed the lockbox. I put my passport in my purse. And then I sat there in the quiet of the condo, listening to my heartbeat in my ears. If I was smart, and I like to think I am, I knew I had to get ahead of him. Because if I waited until he decided to walk out, I'd be left cleaning up the wreckage. That was the day I started planning my own exit strategy. But unlike Liam, I wasn't going to leave quietly. I wasn't going to let him think he'd won. I was going to let him walk straight into a trap of his own making. The first thing I did after reading Liam's journal was buy a small, spiral-bound notebook. If he could document his plans to screw me over, I could document my plans to make sure he didn't succeed. I labeled the cover in tiny letters, for when I forget why I'm doing this. Because part of me still couldn't believe it was real. The next day, I got up at 6 a.m. like usual. I made coffee in the French press, 2 mugs, like always, and set his on the kitchen island. I'd never been a good actress, but I forced a smile when he shuffled in, wearing the same t-shirt he'd slept in. "Morning," he mumbled. "Morning." My voice sounded almost normal. Almost. He glanced at the bank statements I'd spread out over the counter. "What's all this?" "Just paperwork for my taxes." "Oh, you need help?" It was a loaded question. The kind of thing he'd say when he was testing the waters, trying to figure out if I'd let him help with things he had no business touching, like my retirement accounts or my inheritance. I shook my head. "No, it's fine. I have it under control." He shrugged and sipped his coffee. If he noticed my hands trembling, he didn't say anything. After he left off to another client meeting, I called my bank. I asked about the process to remove a cosigner from an account. The woman on the phone was polite but firm. If I added him, I'd need his consent to remove him unless I closed the account entirely. I thanked her, hung up, and wrote down every word in my notebook. That evening, Liam came home carrying a bottle of Pinot Noir and takeout from the Indian place I liked. He set it all on the coffee table with a big, sheepish grin. Figured you deserved a break. I'm not sure which was worse, knowing he was pretending to care or knowing he believed I'd fall for it. We ate chicken tikka masala and watched an episode of some British baking show. He kept reaching over to rub circles on my knee, like he always did when he was trying to reassure me. I excused myself halfway through and locked myself in the bathroom. I turned the fan on to drown out the sound of me gagging. After that night, I stopped leaving any documents unattended. I moved every important paper, tax forms, property deeds, the trust documents for my inheritance, into a small safe in my office closet. He'd never bothered with my office. He said it was too boring in there. For the next 2 weeks, I studied him like he was a puzzle I had to solve. I kept notes in my little spiral. Wednesday, 6:15 p.m. He asked again if I decided about putting him on my rainy day account. I told him I needed more time. He smiled and said, no rush. Friday, 11 a.m. Found a printout in the trash, pre-approval offer for a personal loan in my name and his. He must have forgotten to shred it. I took photos before he got home. Sunday, 2:30 p.m. He left for brunch with Nico. Checked his location sharing. He was at the same address in North Park he'd gone to last weekend. No record of a Nico in his contacts. The more evidence I gathered, the calmer I became. Almost like collecting proof made it easier to detach. I was still working up the nerve to confront him, but every time I imagined his face, imagined him gaslighting me, acting hurt, accusing me of snooping, I knew I couldn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, I called my lawyer. I didn't tell her everything, just that I was considering some financial separation measures. She walked me through closing the joint account, transferring assets into a trust with my name only, and making sure my condo couldn't be leveraged for any debt Liam tried to create. It wasn't cheap, lawyers never are, but I had savings for emergencies. This counted as one. The last step was the hardest. One morning while Liam was in the shower, I took his journal again. I scanned every single page with a handheld scanner I bought online. If he ever tried to deny it, I wanted proof. I put the journal back exactly where it had been, closed the safe, and looked around our bedroom. In that moment, it didn't feel like ours anymore. It felt like a crime scene waiting to happen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake watching his chest rise and fall. I wondered how many nights he'd spent lying next to me, rehearsing his exit plan. I started to understand. He wasn't going to leave quietly. He was going to take everything he could. So I made a promise to myself, right there in the dark. If he thought I was too soft to fight back, he was about to learn otherwise. I spent the next week moving pieces around behind the scenes. To anyone watching, nothing had changed. Liam and I still had dinner together. He still kissed me goodbye in the morning. I still smiled back. But inside, I felt like a stranger in my own life. I started with the bank accounts. I opened a new checking account at a credit union he didn't know about and moved most of my liquid savings there in small increments, just under the threshold that would trigger a transfer alert. It took 5 days to move everything, but when I was done, the old joint account held less than $200. I left it there deliberately. Just enough to keep up appearances. Next, I called the brokerage that managed my investments. I asked them to freeze any withdrawals pending my direct authorization. The representative was confused. Is there a reason you think your account is compromised? I lied and said I'd been getting phishing emails. In a way, that wasn't even a lie. Liam was a scammer in a more expensive shirt. While I was safeguarding the money, I also started making copies of everything. Utility bills in my name, mortgage statements, our lease on the parking space, even old texts where he'd admitted he wasn't paying rent regularly. I didn't know if I'd need proof later, but I wasn't going to be caught unprepared. Every evening, I'd slide the folder of copies into the bottom drawer of my office desk. Liam never ventured in there. The one time he tried to snoop in the past, he'd made it as far as the threshold, looked around at the neat rows of file boxes and my cluttered corkboard, and backed out muttering something about boring work stuff. He never thought I'd be the one laying traps. By the third week, I'd started to relax a little. He hadn't noticed the missing funds. Or if he had, he was pretending he didn't. Then one Friday, he came home with a huge grin and 2 envelopes. I've got a surprise, he announced, dropping them on the kitchen counter. I forced a smile. What's that? Applications for a joint line of credit. Thought it might be a good time to consolidate everything, get a fresh start. I opened one envelope and skimmed the letter inside. My heart was pounding so loud, I was sure he could hear it. It was exactly what he'd written about in the journal. A personal line of credit he could draw against, secured in part by my condo's equity. Isn't this a bit sudden? I asked as neutrally as I could. It's just smart, he insisted, sliding closer to put an arm around my waist. Interest rates are still decent. And if we ever want to renovate or travel, it's easier to have access to funds. Travel. That was probably the plan. Take the money and disappear. He didn't notice my hands clenching. I'll think about it, I said, and turned away to start rinsing vegetables for dinner. His expression tightened. Just for a second. Then he was back to smiling. No rush, he said, the same phrase he'd used in the journal. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat at my desk staring at the folder of copies. My heart was hammering so hard it made my fingers tingle. I knew that if I said no, he'd push harder. And if I said yes, he'd drain the account the minute the funds hit. So I made my decision. I was done playing defense. The next morning, I called my lawyer and asked her to draw up a revocation of his authorized access to the joint account. I also instructed her to prepare an eviction notice. Because while he technically didn't pay rent, he was a resident, and I couldn't just throw him out without the proper paperwork. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the mug he always used, blue ceramic with a tiny chip in the rim. He'd left it there like he always did, trusting I'd clean it up. I thought about all the little ways I'd tried to make things easy for him. All the times I'd ignored the nagging voice that told me something didn't add up. I wasn't going to ignore it anymore. That evening, I started carrying my handbag everywhere, even around the condo. My passport, wallet, and a backup credit card were inside, just in case he decided to pull something before I was ready. When he came home late, reeking of stale beer and some woman's perfume, I was sitting in the living room with my laptop open. He didn't even look guilty. Rough night? I asked quietly. Long night, he corrected, dropping his keys on the console table. Don't start. I didn't start. I just watched him walk down the hall to our bedroom, already feeling like I was watching someone else's life unfold. I didn't sleep much that night, but I felt strangely calm, like I was finally in control again. The following Monday, I left work early under the pretense of a dentist appointment. Instead, I drove straight to my lawyer's office downtown. The eviction paperwork was waiting on her desk, along with a thick manila envelope. She slid it across to me. This includes the notice and instructions. If you're ready, I can have it served as soon as tomorrow. I hesitated, just for a moment. There was something so final about it, like pushing over the first domino in a line I'd spent years setting up. But then I thought of the journal entries describing exactly how he planned to gut my accounts and disappear. I'm ready, I said. She nodded. We'll have the process server deliver this while he's home. That way there's no dispute about receiving it. I thanked her and walked back to my car feeling lightheaded, like I'd just run a marathon. By the time I got home, Liam was already there. He was sprawled on the sofa in a t-shirt and gym shorts, eating the leftovers I'd planned to take for lunch. Hey, babe, he said, mouth half full. Did you see the email from First Horizon? They're following up about the credit line. I paused in the doorway, trying to keep my expression neutral. Yeah, I saw it. And? I'm not comfortable with it, I said carefully. He frowned, dropping the fork into the container. Why not? Because I don't think it's necessary, I replied, my voice a little shaky. We don't need to combine any more finances. For a second, the mask slipped. His eyes went flat and cold, like a shutter closing behind them. Is this about trust? He asked quietly. I swallowed. I guess so. He stood up slowly. You know, it's really insulting that you think I'd screw you over. I didn't answer. I couldn't. He stared at me a moment longer, then turned and stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door. I waited until I heard the shower running. Then I picked up his phone from the coffee table and scrolled to the call log. The same unfamiliar number kept popping up over and over, sometimes late at night. I copied it into my notebook, then put the phone back exactly as I'd found it. I spent the evening pretending everything was normal. We watched TV in stiff silence. When I went to bed, I lay facing the wall so he couldn't see my face. In the morning, I left early. I didn't say goodbye. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer, service complete. He's been informed he has 30 days to vacate the property. Let me know if there are any issues. I exhaled shakily. Part relief, part dread. I knew he'd be furious. Sure enough, at 5:52 p.m., he called me. What the fuck is this? He demanded before I could say anything. You know what it is, I said evenly. You can't just kick me out. I live here. You don't pay rent. You're not on the mortgage. Legally, you're a guest. There was a long silence on the other end. When he finally spoke again, his voice was soft and venomous. You think you're clever? No, I said quietly. I think I'm done. He hung up. I sat there holding my phone, trying to steady my breathing. My hands were shaking so badly I had to put the phone down on the counter. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I'd finally wrested the power back. I knew it wouldn't be over that easily, though. Liam wasn't the type to slink away quietly. Sure enough, 2 hours later, he came home. He didn't say a word when he walked in, just slammed the door hard enough that a picture frame rattled on the wall. He stalked past me into the bedroom. A minute later, he emerged with a duffel bag. "You'll regret this," he said flatly, not even looking at me. I didn't reply. He left again, slamming the door behind him. When I was sure he was gone, I walked into the bedroom and opened the closet. His drawers were still full of clothes. His cologne bottles lined the dresser. He hadn't really left, he was just trying to scare me. But I wasn't going to let him. That night, I changed the password on the smart lock. I slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning, Liam tried to come back in. I heard the lock beep once, twice, then emit the angry little tone it made when the code was wrong. I was sitting in the kitchen with my coffee, waiting. He pounded on the door so hard I thought he'd crack the frame. "Open the door," he shouted. I didn't move. After a minute, my phone buzzed. "You changed the lock? Really? You're out of your mind." I ignored it. Then he called. I watched his name flash on the screen and fade. He called again and again. Finally, I switched my phone to airplane mode. The pounding stopped. I peeked through the peephole. He was standing there with his hands braced on either side of the doorframe, his jaw clenched tight. After a few seconds, he turned and stalked off down the hall. I stood there shaking. My heart was thumping so hard I felt a little dizzy. But even through the fear, there was a grim satisfaction. He couldn't get in. Not anymore. When I finally sat down again, I pulled out my notebook and wrote, "Day 1 of reclaiming my life." I went to work and kept my phone off all day. I couldn't face the flood of messages I knew would be waiting. When I came home, there was a note stuck to the door in shaky handwriting. "You're making a huge mistake. Let's talk." I crumpled it up and threw it away. That evening, I called the locksmith to confirm the new code was active and that the override key was stored safely in their vault. "You're sure he can't get in?" I asked for the third time. "He can't," the tech assured me. "Even if he tries to force the lock, the alarm will trigger." "Good," I said, though my stomach was still in knots. Over the next few days, he tried every tactic in the book. He left voicemails, first apologetic, then pleading, then furious. He texted me that he was so sorry and didn't mean to hurt me. Then he escalated. One night, around 11 p.m., my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "You're going to regret humiliating me like this." I read it over and over, the words sinking into my chest like cold water. I called the non-emergency police line and filed a harassment report. They said there wasn't much they could do since he hadn't threatened me physically yet, but they took down the details. After I hung up, I sat on the sofa in the dark. Part of me wondered if this was all worth it, if it would have been easier to just let him leave with what he wanted. But then I thought of his journal, the way he described me, too trusting, like I was a mark, not a partner. No, he didn't get to win. I took screenshots of all the texts, printed them, and added them to the folder in my office. 2 days later, a notification popped up on my phone, an alert from my credit monitoring service. Someone had tried to open a line of credit in my name at a bank I'd never used. I called immediately to report the fraud. They locked it down and flagged my file. I sat there, breathing hard, feeling equal parts sick and vindicated. This was exactly what he'd planned. He was just accelerating the timeline because I'd cut him off. That night, I wrote a new line in my notebook: "He will not get away with this." I didn't know exactly how it would end, but I knew I wasn't going to let him walk away with my money or my peace of mind. I started leaving the condo only when I absolutely had to. Every time I did, I checked the peephole twice and carried my pepper spray in my pocket. Liam kept trying. One morning, I found another note wedged under the door. "We can still fix this. You're overreacting. Just call me." I didn't. Instead, I made a second appointment with my lawyer. When I walked into her office, I felt like I was dragging a 100-pound weight behind me. She looked up from her laptop and smiled sympathetically. "Rough week. You could say that." I pulled out the folder and set it in front of her. All the evidence, screenshots of texts, credit fraud alerts, copies of the pre-approval letters. She flipped through it silently. Every so often, she'd nod to herself or scribble a note. When she looked up, her expression was measured but serious. "Here's what we're going to do," she said. "I'll prepare a cease and desist letter regarding the harassment. If he attempts any further contact or tries to access your accounts, we'll escalate to a restraining order." I swallowed. "Will that actually stop him?" "It will give us leverage," she said. "And it will build a paper trail if he tries anything else." I exhaled slowly. "Okay, let's do it." When I left her office, I sat in my car for 10 minutes before I could trust my hands to stop shaking enough to drive. That afternoon, I decided I'd waited long enough to tell someone what was really happening. I called my older brother Aaron. He lived 2 hours away and had never liked Liam. In fact, he'd warned me years ago that Liam seemed too interested in my money. When he picked up, I blurted it all out, everything from the journal to the eviction to the threats. There was a long silence when I finished. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked quietly. "Because I was embarrassed." "You don't have anything to be embarrassed about," he said firmly. "You trusted someone who didn't deserve it. That's not your fault." For the first time since this all began, I felt a little less alone. Aaron insisted on driving down that weekend. He showed up Saturday morning with 2 giant duffel bags and a determined expression. "Where is he?" he demanded as soon as he stepped inside. "Not here." "Good." He set the bags down and hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs would crack. We spent the afternoon changing out all the passwords on my devices, freezing my credit with all 3 bureaus, and setting up security cameras by the front door. That evening, we ordered pizza and sat on the sofa, watching the live camera feed on my laptop. "You know," Aaron said between bites, "you're going to come out of this stronger. Someday you'll look back and be glad you didn't let him bleed you dry." "I know," I said, though part of me still didn't believe it yet. But I wanted to. Late that night, after Aaron had gone to bed in the guest room, my phone buzzed again. Another text from an unknown number. "Hope you're happy. You ruined everything." I read it without reacting. Then I deleted it. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of replying. The next morning, I woke to an email notification. Subject: Document Delivery Confirmation Body. The cease and desist letter has been successfully served. I stared at the email for a long moment, feeling a dull throb behind my eyes. It was one more step toward ending this nightmare. But I knew he wouldn't disappear without a final attempt to get what he wanted. And I was ready. The following week was a blur of small victories and constant vigilance. With Aaron still staying over, Liam didn't try to come by in person. But he didn't stop testing my boundaries either. He tried to log into my old joint checking account twice. Both times, the bank alerted me immediately, and I confirmed that no access was authorized. He sent 3 more emails. The first was a rambling apology. The second was an angry screed accusing me of turning everyone against him. The third was just a single line: "You'll regret this." I didn't reply to any of them. I just forwarded each one to my lawyer, who added them to the file she was compiling. By Wednesday, the tension had settled into something almost like routine. Every morning, I checked the security cameras. Every evening, I made sure the deadbolt was secure. It wasn't exactly peaceful, but it was something close to safe. That Thursday night, I was sitting on the sofa reading when Aaron came out of the guest room, rubbing his eyes. "Can't sleep?" I asked. "Got a weird alert on my phone," he said. "Motion detected out front." My stomach lurched. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the feed. There he was, Liam, standing at the edge of the porch, wearing a hoodie pulled low over his face. He wasn't moving. Just standing there, like he was deciding whether to come closer. Aaron leaned over my shoulder. "Call the police." I didn't hesitate. My hands were surprisingly steady as I dialed. When the dispatcher answered, I gave my name and address and explained that my ex, who'd been legally evicted, was trespassing. "Are you inside the residence now?" she asked. "Yes." "Stay inside. Officers are en route." Aaron went to stand by the door. I could see the vein in his temple pulsing. On the camera, Liam shifted his weight from foot to foot. Then he pulled something from his pocket, a folded piece of paper, and laid it on the welcome mat. He looked straight at the camera, his expression blank, then turned and walked back down the path. It felt like a full minute passed before I could breathe again. When the police arrived, I let them in and showed them the footage. One officer went out to collect the note while the other took my statement. The paper was a handwritten letter. 4 pages, front and back. Part apology, part threat, part bizarre justification for why he deserved compensation for the years he'd invested. I felt nauseated reading it. The officer flipped through the pages, then looked up at me. "Do you want to press charges for trespassing?" I hesitated. Aaron cleared his throat. "Yes, she does." The officer nodded. "We'll document this as an incident. If he comes back, call us immediately. With the existing cease and desist, you're well within your rights to pursue a restraining order." After they left, Aaron and I sat in the living room in silence. The envelope with the letter lay on the coffee table between us. I couldn't bring myself to touch it again. "I'm sorry," I whispered finally. "I never thought it would get this far." Aaron shook his head. "Don't apologize. You're doing the right thing." That night, I lay awake in the dark, replaying the image of Liam staring into the camera. I knew in my gut that he'd try again. But I also knew I was stronger than I'd been a month ago. When dawn finally came, I made coffee and sat by the window watching the sunrise. It felt like the first moment of calm I'd had in weeks. I knew it wasn't over yet. But for the first time, I believed it would be soon. The next few days passed in uneasy quiet. Liam didn't come back in person, but he tried one last move. Sunday evening, I was reviewing my credit reports, something that had become a weekly ritual, when I spotted a fresh inquiry from an online lender I'd never heard of. I felt my heart start hammering. I called them immediately, praying I'd caught it in time. The woman who answered was polite but cautious. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I just received a credit alert. Someone applied for a personal loan in my name. I did not authorize this." She confirmed that an application had been submitted that morning, using my social security number and an old address from 2 apartments ago. "Can you cancel it?" I asked. "Yes, ma'am. We'll flag it as fraudulent and remove the inquiry." I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. When I hung up, I realized my hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the desk to make them stop. This was it, the last desperate attempt to grab whatever he could before disappearing. But it wasn't going to work. The next morning, I called my lawyer and asked her to start the restraining order process. "I'm tired," I admitted. "I just want it to be over." "You're almost there," she said gently. "You've already done everything right. He's out of options." I wanted to believe her. 2 days later, I took the morning off work to appear in front of the judge. Aaron came with me and sat in the gallery while I explained everything: the journal, the threats, the fraudulent applications, the trespassing. I felt strangely calm as I spoke. Like all the fear had burned itself out, leaving only clarity. The judge listened patiently, then reviewed the stack of documentation my lawyer had prepared. When she looked up, her expression was firm. "Given the evidence," she said, "I'm granting the restraining order. He is prohibited from contacting you in any form, coming within 500 feet of your residence or workplace, or attempting to access your financial accounts." The gavel came down with a dull thud. I felt something loosen in my chest. When we left the courthouse, I stood on the steps in the bright morning sun and let myself feel it, relief. It wasn't over, not completely. I knew he'd keep trying in small ways, petty barbs, maybe an occasional email sent from a burner account. But legally and practically, he was cut off. That evening, I came home to a quiet condo. Aaron had left that afternoon, promising he was only a phone call away if I needed him. I walked into the bedroom, opened the closet, and looked at the empty shelf where Liam's things used to be. It finally felt like my space again. I pulled the little spiral-bound notebook out of my nightstand, the one I'd started the day I read his journal, and flipped to the first page. For when I forget why I'm doing this. I turned to the last page and wrote one final line. "Because I deserve better." Then I closed it and put it away for good. I know some people will judge me for reading his journal in the first place. Maybe I would have judged me, too, before this happened. But if I hadn't, I would have lost everything: my savings, my home, my sense of self. And in the end, he was right about one thing: I was too trusting. Not anymore.